Dragging stuff around on the web is a very satisfying thing when done right. Motion makes anything draggable and it makes it feel like a native app. Alright, so here we have a plain div. This is just a box with a purple background. I've made it a motion.div because we are going to use motion, but right now it's doing absolutely nothing special. I would love to be able to drag that box, but obviously that is not a thing. Well, let's change all that by adding a 4-letter property. In my motion.div, I will add drag. That's it. This tiny little property means that now, watch this, I can press and hold and now drag and release the shape anywhere I want. It also has a really nice inertia feel, so if I was to flick it a little bit, it'll continue moving. If I was to flick it more, I would probably lose it and it's gone. Let's refresh the page to bring it back to the middle, and that alone, whoop, I just got it, is super, and I lost it, satisfying. As of right now, the drag action is free and unrestricted, and as a result, we can easily lose our shape, but you can add constraints to make it to your liking. For example, if I wanted to lock the drag on the horizontal axis, all I would need to do is pass a value to the drag prop. And as you can see, we have the X and Y axis. If we go drag X, I am only going to be able to go left and right. And if I go up and down, you can see that it's following left and right, but not budging from these horizontal rails it is in. And pretty sure you would have figured that out, but if we go drag Y, the exact opposite happens. We can go up and down, but never left or right. There's actually even a way to restrict on horizontal or vertical based on the first bit of movement. So if I remove the Y here, there is another prop, and I'm blanking on its name, but I'm pretty sure this is drag direction lock, which if I go left and right to begin with, I'm going to be locked into the left and right. But if I was to start going upwards or downwards, I would be locked in the Y axis. So this gives you flexibility, but always will only pick one direction. And as you've seen, while I was searching for the prop, there are so many possible property drag controls, drag elastic, drag listener, momentum, propagation, snap to origin. This is almost endless and super powerful. Okay, in a video about gestures, I introduced the while dash properties for something like while hover, while tap, and drag is no different. We can do something while the user is dragging an element. So if we wanted to scale up or rotate the element while we're dragging, and you know what, let me remove the drag direction lock here. But to apply some animations and style changes while we're dragging, as you guessed, we can use the whileDrag property. So let's go scale 1.2 and maybe rotate 9 degrees, just a little bit. And now when I start dragging the element, you can see that it's rotated and scaled up a bit. And when I release it, it'll go back to its original position. Again, I can press and hold, and this is not a drag until I start moving, and then the drag event occurs. Just to clarify what I just said, if I was to go while tap, and the tap event is different to the drag event, and here I went scale 0.9, we should be able to see the difference. When I tap on the box, it'll get smaller, but as soon as I start moving, it's actually 3 pixels direction. It's considered a drag, not a tap anymore. And so the event switches from while tap to while drag. Pretty cool. All right, let's go back to my favorite thing about dragging elements, and it's the feeling of physics, the little flick and motion and momentum an element has when you release it. As you've seen, by default, the release momentum is quite strong. So if I was to flick it upwards, it'll go for a while. And any more effort than this, and it's completely gone out of the window. So if you don't want this drag momentum, but why would you? You can turn it off with drag momentum false. And I'm only kidding, there's definitely cases where it's better that when you release, the element stops directly. So I'm trying to flick it with violence, and it's never really going any further out than I release it. Of course, you can have more control than all or nothing in terms of momentum, but to exemplify a few other possibilities you have, let's add a constraint around a box, which is where we want the drag action to happen, and we want the element to never get out of this container. So here I will paste a wrapping element, and let's bring the closing div after our motion div, and I'll explain what's going on. So we've added a styled element that has a width and height of 350 with a colored dashed border. And so essentially this is just a visual wrapper right now, but what we want is to make the element stick within that element. Right now, we can still easily go out of there. There is no problem whatsoever. Let me remove the momentum cancellation, this drag momentum false. And now we're going to add some constraints to this draggability of this element. So drag constraints is a prop. And yes, we could auto accept Copilot like this. And let's refresh the page to center our element. And now I should only be able to drag the element for about 150 pixels. I mean, it's happening. You can't really see, or well, I guess you can see, but because of the viewport size, let's change all of these values to something like 50. And so now it should be a little bit clearer. If I try to go down, it stops following my mouse after 50 pixels. You can see it still sort of follows, but it's definitely trying to drag back to the middle. It follows the cursor perfectly for 50 pixels in any direction and then starts to drift off. And we're not using the boundaries here just yet, but it feels like we do. The resistance that the element is showcasing when you try to drag it too far based on the constraint feels like an elastic band. And well, the prop to control this is called drag elastic. Check it out. One more prop, drag elastic. And here we will have a value between 0 and 1, where 0 is absolutely rigid, I'm not moving anymore, and 1 just allows you to keep going, but will eventually come back. So if I set drag elastic to 0 and refresh the page to center our element, it should now very clearly, as you can see, have a hard stop within 50 pixels of the center point or starting point. Where if I had a value of 1, it would totally come along for the ride as far as I want, but once released, it should snap back within the 50 pixels radius that it's allowed in the constraints. And of course, any value in between, like 0.2, will add a bit of nuance to it. So instead of hard stopping, it has a little bit of give, which kind of has a nice feel to it. All right, so I've introduced this dashed line container, so let's do something about it. Instead of hard coding the values here for the constraints, I want the constraints to be essentially that div. And the way we can do this is by using a ref. So let's have a ref of constraint ref. Doesn't exist yet, but let's go and import useRef. And then inside our lesson component, we're going to create that constraint ref with the useRef hook. So now we're creating a ref and assigning it to this div element. And instead of passing all these values, I can literally pass the constraint ref instead. And this will very conveniently set the constraint to the bounding edges of that element with the ref. So if I try to drag, you can see that it's following along all the way to the edges, and then it will release and completely align with the edge. So if I was flicking it super hard, it will always come back to the edge. That's pretty neat, right? So remember how we were talking about momentum and physics, and I introduced this rectangle with the dotted border to have constraints. The reason I've done this is I can show you now how we can control the physics of the bounce whenever you go out of bounds and it needs to come back. So I will add yet another prop, drag transition. And this is where you can apply a spring-like bounce behavior. So I have bounce properties like bounce damping and bounce stiffness. If you've watched the video on transition and springs, that should make sense. So let's go with the stiffness of 600 and a damping of, let's go with 10. So now we've customized how the element will bounce off the walls literally when I flick it. And you can see that now it has a very springy behavior. If I release it from outside, it's going to have this nice jelly-like effect. If I had a much lower damping, like 3, the bounce would last a lot longer and possibly be a little bit over the top. And if I had something like 25, it would become a lot more subtle. Honestly, I think that with 600 stiffness and maybe 15 damping, we should have a pretty cool result. Let's try it. Yeah, that's pretty nice. All right, there is so much more about drag gestures in motion. This is personally one of my favorite features because of how easy it is to use and how powerful and satisfying it is.